I was sitting in the dim ultrasound room, the machine humming softly like it had been waiting for this moment all along. The cold gel on my belly made my skin prickle, but it wasn't the chill that made my hands shake. It was him. My husband, standing just a step away, eyes fixed on the screen, his expression twisted, and I knew before he spoke that nothing would ever feel the same. The doctor's clipboard trembled in her hands, almost imperceptibly, but I noticed. She was a stranger, but the tension around us made the room feel smaller, tighter, as though the walls were pressing in. My heart thudded against my ribs so loudly that I worried it might echo through the sterile space. Then he said it. His voice was quiet, almost calm, but it carried a weight that left me breathless. I didn't expect this. I stared at him, searching for the tone. Fear, confusion, amusement, but there was none. Just a pause so heavy it seemed to fill every corner of the room. My chest tightened. The words felt like a hand, gripping me too hard, refusing to let go. The ultrasound screen flickered. The baby's tiny heartbeat pulsed steadily, innocent, oblivious to the storm breaking above it. I gripped the edges of the table, trying to anchor myself. His lips moved again, slower this time, deliberate. Are you sure? It was not a question. It was a blade. The doctor cleared her throat softly, the sound swallowed by the quiet roar in my ears. I wanted to ask him what he meant, why his gaze had shifted to something else entirely. But I couldn't. My body refused to move. My mind refused to process. Outside, rain tapped against the hospital windows, soft and relentless. Each drop was a tiny echo of the shock settling into my bones. I realized, in that cold, humming room, that the person I trusted most had just revealed the sharpest pain. And there was no turning back. Sometimes betrayal arrives not with shouting or confrontation. Sometimes it comes wrapped in the quiet disbelief of someone you loved, staring at a tiny flicker on a screen that should have been all hope. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you loved? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear you. The doctor's eyes flicked toward me, and for a fraction of a second, I saw it hesitation, almost fear. She cleared her throat softly, lowering her voice to a whisper that carried across the room like a shadow I couldn't ignore. I couldn't hear the words, only the trembling tone as she spoke to the nurse beside her. Their eyes darted between the screen and my husband, and then back to me, as if they were both trying not to break some invisible rule. The rain outside tapped insistently against the tall windows, its rhythm accusatory, like it knew what had just happened in that room and was calling me to notice. Each drop slid down the glass, distorting the world beyond in slow, deliberate blurs, mirroring the confusion pulling in my chest. I could feel the room closing in, the sterile white walls pressing gently against my ears, amplifying every sound, the soft hum of the ultrasound, the whispered murmurs, the tapping rain. I wanted to ask what they were saying. I wanted to demand answers, but I couldn't. My body felt locked in place, my thoughts suspended like the tiny heartbeat flickering on the screen. Even the baby's pulse, once a source of comfort, felt distant, fragile, like it existed in another, untouchable world. My husband's hand brushed against mine, brief, almost casual, but there was nothing warm there, only a strange weight that made my stomach churn. He avoided the doctor's uneasy glance, looking instead at the screen with a calm that felt deliberate, rehearsed. The doctor's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze returning to the clipboard, then to me, then to the ceiling, anywhere but the man who had shattered this moment. In that suspended silence, I realized something heavy. Truth carries a weight even when it isn't spoken aloud. The words weren't coming from their mouths yet, but their eyes, their hesitation, their small, careful movements, they were already speaking the truth louder than any voice could. Sometimes, what isn't said echoes longer than what is. And in that quiet, watching them, I felt the first sharp edges of betrayal dig into me. He finally spoke, calm, deliberate, measured, each syllable falling into the room like stones in a silent pond. I didn't think it would be like this. His voice had no tremor, no hesitation. Yet every word cut deeper than any shout, any accusation I could have imagined. The ultrasound machine hummed softly, as though indifferent to the storm his words had unleashed. I looked down at the counter. The teacup I had set down moments before trembled slightly, as if it felt my pulse echoing through the kitchen of my mind. Steam curled from the surface, swirling like the thoughts that refused to settle. My hands gripped the edge, knuckles whitening, trying to anchor myself to something solid while my heart unraveled. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he said again, slower this time, deliberate. Each pause was a knife twisting inside me. My lips parted, trembling, but no sound came. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation, but words had abandoned me. The betrayal was too sharp, too immediate. It didn't need to be shouted to be heard. It was already bleeding into every corner of the room. Outside, rain fell harder now, hammering against the window like it knew my disbelief, my devastation. Light flickered across the counter, catching on the trembling teacup, reflecting the fracture in my world. The doctor's eyes flicked between us, but even she seemed unsure how to fill the silence that had become a cage. I realized then that some words leave marks deeper than fists or slaps ever could. They echo inside the heart long after the mouth has closed. His calm delivery made it worse, the deliberate cruelty of someone who has weaponized ordinary conversation into a punishment I could not escape. I wanted to vanish, to disappear into the soft hum of the machine or the steady rhythm of the rain. But I stayed. I had no choice but to listen. And in that room, with the teacup trembling under the soft light and my husband's words like invisible scars, I understood the sharpest betrayals are not loud. They are quiet. I left the hospital without a word. My footsteps echoed down the long, empty corridor, each step louder than the one before, as if the walls themselves were recording the fracture in my life. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights did nothing to warm the chill that had settled into my bones. Outside, the rain had picked up, turning the city lights into blurred halos that seemed distant, unreachable, like the life I had imagined. Each droplet that hit my umbrella carried the weight of disbelief, of betrayal too sharp to name. My coat was damp, but it did not matter. The cold was nothing compared to the quiet emptiness gnawing inside me. Passers-by hurried past, umbrellas in hand, their faces invisible through the rain. I realized with a hollow certainty that pain often walks beside us unnoticed, invisible to anyone who isn't carrying the same shadow. I tried to think of something, anything that could anchor me, but my mind felt like fog, thoughts swirling and dissolving before they could take shape. The city around me moved indifferent, unaware of the storm that had just consumed a life in a single moment. The neon signs reflected in puddles, distorted, fractured almost as if they were mocking the reality I had just been handed. For the first time, I felt the full weight of solitude. It was not dramatic or loud. It was quiet, patient, wrapping itself around me like a coat stitched from shadows. I did not cry. I could not. There was nothing to release, only the realization that I was entirely, utterly alone in this revelation, and yet, a part of me walked forward anyway. Step by step, soaked through, each echo in the corridor a reminder that life does not pause for heartbreak. Pain follows silently. Yes, but so does survival. And somewhere in that relentless rhythm of footsteps and rain, I understood that leaving was not surrender. It was acknowledgement, a quiet, dignified acceptance of a world that had suddenly shifted beneath me. I sat alone in my apartment, the soft hum of the heater the only companion to the steady ticking of the wall clock. Each second felt accusatory, as if it were counting not the hours, but the betrayals I had endured. The room was dim, shadows pooling in corners, and I could feel the weight of silence pressing against my shoulders. I did not cry, not yet. Instead, I let the quiet rage settle inside me, slow and deliberate. Like a storm gathering strength before it breaks, I began to notice the patterns, the small habits my husband could not hide even if he wanted to. How he left his phone on the edge of the counter, how he lingered over certain messages, the way his shoes were always positioned neatly by the door as though he anticipated returning from somewhere he shouldn't. Each detail was a thread, and I traced it patiently, weaving a map I would follow when the time came. The ticking clock filled the room, relentless. It mocked me, yes, but it also reminded me that time could be my ally. Anger screamed, but I would not let it. I whispered my plan to myself, the words soft, almost intimate, as if they were a secret pact between my pulse and my mind. Revenge doesn't need fireworks. It doesn't need dramatic gestures. It waits, patient, quiet, invisible until it arrives at exactly the right moment. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the window. Its rhythm was slow, almost deliberate, echoing my own pulse. I poured a cup of tea and watched it tremble in the dim light, steam curling upward like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Each sip was a reminder of the calm I needed to keep, the patience I had to practice. I did not hate him yet. Not fully. What I felt was something sharper, cleaner. Awareness. Awareness of betrayal, of deceit, of the fact that I could act while he remained blind. And as the shadows deepened around me, I realized the truth. Revenge does not scream. It waits, it watches, it plans, and when it moves, it does so with the precision of a heartbeat in the quietest part of the night. I trailed him through the rain-slick streets, careful to remain a shadow among the shadows. The city was quiet now, the usual chatter reduced to distant echoes and the occasional honk of a lonely car. My umbrella shielded me from the drizzle, but not from the growing storm inside. Every step brought me closer to truths I had only begun to suspect. He slipped into a dimly lit cafe, one I had never seen him enter before. The warm glow of the interior spilled onto the wet pavement, painting small rectangles of light on the pavement like secrets waiting to be exposed. I paused outside, listening. Laughter, soft but unfamiliar, drifted out through the cracked open door. My chest tightened. Steam rose from the cup of coffee I had brought to myself, curling upward, twisting and turning as though it carried the questions I dared not yet voice through the haze of warmth and lamplight. I watched him sit across from someone whose face was hidden in the shadow of the table. They spoke quietly, leaning in, sharing words that were invisible to me but heavy in the air. I didn't need to hear them to know the betrayal was real. The way he shifted, careful, deliberate. The way his hand hovered over the table as if claiming territory not his own, everything spoke louder than any confession could. I sipped my coffee slowly, the bitterness grounding me, keeping the tremor out of my hands. Rain tapped against the window, steady and accusatory, echoing the rhythm of my heartbeat. My mind traced every detail, every movement, every shadowed glance. The betrayal wasn't hidden. It had been in plain sight all along. I had chosen to see it now, and in that quiet cafe, watching him unaware, I understood a fundamental truth. What is hidden will eventually breathe itself into the open. Shadows cannot remain forever, and secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, always find a way to surface. I left then, unnoticed, coffee still warm in my hands, carrying with me a clarity as sharp as the night air. I returned home that night, the rain still sliding down the window, tracing rivulets like quiet tears. The apartment was dark, except for the pale light of the desk lamp in the study. I approached it slowly, each step measured, each breath deliberate. On the desk lay the pieces of a life I had only just begun to understand: photos, messages, receipts, small fragments that, when seen together, formed a picture too sharp to ignore. I picked up a photograph, careful not to shake the image into ruin. Him, smiling at someone who was not me, the familiarity in his posture almost mocking. My fingers tightened around the edges as if holding the paper could anchor me against the storm raging inside. Next, I scrolled through his messages, each word a whisper of betrayal, each punctuation mark a small confirmation of what my heart had suspected. The room smelled faintly of coffee and dust, the steady patter of rain against the glass providing a rhythm to the realization settling over me. It was not dramatic, no shouting, no confrontation, just facts. Silent, undeniable facts that crystallized the truth. Each small detail, each piece of evidence, sharpened my resolve. The calm of my apartment contrasted with the upheaval of my mind. Even the ticking of the clock seemed deliberate now, counting the moments until my patience transformed into action. Pain was there, yes. The kind that sits quietly in your chest, pressing against your ribs with soft persistence. But alongside it was clarity. Seeing clearly is both liberating and painful. I understood, in a way I had not before, that knowing the truth allowed me a certain power, the kind that does not scream, does not rush, but waits. I set the photographs down, the messages still open on the screen, and let the rain wash over the window pane. Outside, the city moved, unaware of the small, private revelation that had just taken place in a quiet apartment. Inside, I breathed steadily, embracing both the pain and the power that clarity had given me. I watched him from a distance, the city lights blurring around him like a careless painting, unaware of the web quietly forming. The hum of traffic, the chatter of passers-by, all indifferent to the storm I had begun to set into motion. He moved with his usual confidence, oblivious to the fact that his life had just started to pivot in directions he could not see. Earlier that day, I had subtly altered his schedule, nothing obvious, nothing traceable. A meeting moved an hour early, an appointment quietly shifted to a less convenient location. It was small, seemingly insignificant, but that was the point. Precision was my ally. As he arrived, the public embarrassment unfolded with meticulous inevitability. People glanced, eyebrows raised, whispers passing like invisible knives. I stayed hidden, a calm observer in the rain-streaked window across the street. Feeling a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest, steam rose from my coffee cup as I watched him fumble through the unintended consequences of his day. Papers clutched too tightly, phone buzzing incessantly with reminders he had never planned to attend. Every small misstep was a wordless confirmation that the scales had begun to tip. The city moved on, oblivious. While I savored the silent triumph of action without confrontation, there was no joy in cruelty, only awareness, strategy, and the slow burn satisfaction of justice administered without fanfare. I did not smile openly, nor did I laugh. My heartbeat was steady, measured. I had discovered a power in patience, in the ability to orchestrate without spectacle, to act with calm deliberation. Justice, I realized, could be quiet, precise, almost invisible to those it targeted. Yet it left a mark, one they could feel but never immediately trace. As I left my perch and stepped into the night, the city's indifferent glow washed over me. The first strike was complete, subtle yet undeniable, and I knew, with every step in the rain-slicked streets, that this was only the beginning. The bedroom was quiet when I entered, but the air seemed heavier than usual, weighted with expectation that I refused to fulfill. Curtains swayed gently against the wind, brushing the floor in lazy, deliberate strokes. The bed was neatly made, as if he had just left, or perhaps as if he wanted it to appear that way. I placed a folded note on his pillow, the paper crisp against my fingertips, and walked away without a backward glance. No confrontation, no shouting, no tears, just absence. The emptiness of the room itself was the message. I stayed in the doorway for a moment, watching the shadows stretch across the walls like long fingers pointing toward truths he could no longer deny. The faint scent of his cologne lingered, clinging to the air, but I did not inhale it. Instead, I let the emptiness speak for me. I had learned that punishment did not always require action. Sometimes it thrived in what was missing in the quiet. Space where expectation should have been, in the echo of a presence that was no longer there. My footsteps left no sound, but the silence I carried was deafening. The wind played with the curtains, tugging them as if to underscore the point. This absence, this withdrawal, was deliberate, calculated. Rain whispered against the windows, a soft accomplice to my decision. Outside, the city moved on, unknowing of the small but profound upheaval that had just occurred behind closed doors. I closed the door quietly, leaving the note to speak where my voice would not. Silence, I understood, often conveyed far more than anger ever could. In that empty room, in the space I refused to fill, he would feel the weight of what was lost, the absence of trust, the emptiness that mirrored the void between us. Sometimes the loudest punishment comes not from action, but from the quiet, and this, I realized, was a lesson he would never forget. The phone rang just as I stepped into the hallway, its insistent chime cutting through the quiet of the apartment. I recognized the number, not mine, not his, but I hesitated only a second before answering. The voice on the other end was urgent, clipped and meant for him. But in that instant, it became mine to hear. "What? You're sure?" the voice whispered, a mixture of panic and shame. My fingers tightened around the receiver as my heart began a rhythm it could not contain. Rain pounded harder against the window, drumming against the panes like a frantic warning. Each word that followed struck with the weight of revelation, unraveling threads I had not realized were still tightly woven. He had lied not just about her, not just about the indiscretions I had discovered, but about something deeper, something that no one outside our home could have imagined. The confession spilled like a torrent, unplanned, unstoppable, leaving me standing in the hallway with the phone pressed to my ear and the room spinning gently around me. I barely recognized the man they spoke of, the one my husband had hidden behind smiles and empty reassurances. I held the receiver, letting the rain and the dark hallway absorb my silence. No words left my lips. None were needed. My chest ached with a mixture of sorrow and cold clarity. Life, I realized, never unfolds in straight lines. Every lie, every secret, every betrayal had its own winding path, and surprises lurked where we least expected them. The rain softened, as if mourning alongside me, or perhaps taking pity. I let the call end without speaking, the finality of it lingering like smoke in the still air. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the truth I now held. Inside, I breathed, slowly, absorbing the depth of this revelation, knowing it had changed everything. Some truths are meant to strike silently, leaving their mark not in noise, but in the quiet spaces where we confront them alone. And tonight, I had been forced to face one that would stay with me far longer than any storm. I found myself on the pier that evening, the wooden boards slick with rain, each step producing a soft, hollow thud. The waves lapped gently against the posts, rhythmic and indifferent, as if the sea itself refused to acknowledge the storm growing in my chest. My coat clung damply to my skin, the wind teasing loose strands of hair across my face. I didn't move quickly. I let each step stretch, letting the calm of the night settle around me like a temporary veil. Outwardly, I appeared serene, my hands tucked neatly into my pockets, my shoulders relaxed, but inside, a tempest raged, a precise, calculated storm born from betrayal, from lies, from the quiet rage I had nurtured in silence. The city lights shimmered in the distance, their reflections wavering across the water like hesitant truths. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel the stillness before the inevitable collapse. Steam rose from the cup of tea I had brought with me, coiling into the night air, fragile and fleeting. I watched it dissolve slowly, much like my anger would patiently, deliberately, before it found its mark. Each breath I drew seemed to strengthen my resolve, carving lines of determination into my chest. The calm wasn't weakness. It was preparation. I glanced at the horizon where the dark water kissed the dim sky. The waves whispered against the pier, indifferent yet constant, reminding me that life moved forward whether we were ready or not. The storm within me mirrored the world outside, quiet, unnoticed, but building with relentless intent. Patience, I realized, was a weapon as sharp as any truth. It allowed wounds to settle, thoughts to crystallize, and strategy to form, and when the collapse came, it would arrive not as chaos but as precision, swift, deliberate, and inevitable. The pier beneath my feet felt solid, the water beneath endless, and I knew that when the storm broke, I would stand ready to meet it, unmoved in purpose and unshaken in will. The gallery was quiet, save for the soft hum of distant traffic outside. I placed the photos and messages carefully into the hands of a few trusted friends, their expressions unreadable but attentive. The city lights outside shimmered against the windows, casting long, wavering reflections that felt almost accusatory, as if the walls themselves were complicit in the slow unmasking of the man I had once loved. The wind moved through the old curtains, teasing the edges, brushing against the floor like a whisper. I didn't speak. There was no need. Each photo, each small detail, each carefully preserved message carried its own weight. I let them observe, let the truth settle into their awareness, They didn't ask questions. They only absorbed, their silence amplifying the impact. The betrayal, once hidden, was now breathing in the light, subtle but undeniable. I watched him from the periphery as he moved through the gallery later, unaware that the foundation of his careful facade was already cracking. I didn't raise my voice, didn't call attention. I simply existed in the calm certainty that what needed to be revealed would unfold quietly, inexorably. Friends who had once smiled politely in his presence now exchanged knowing glances, their awareness shifting the balance without spectacle. There was a strange beauty in this kind of justice. Precise, patient, inevitable, no loud accusations, no dramatic confrontations, just a slow, undeniable acknowledgement of truth by those whose opinions mattered. Each reflection in the gallery glass seemed sharper now, edges cutting subtly against the lie he had carried for so long. I stepped back, letting the night absorb my presence. The betrayal was no longer mine alone to bear. It had begun its own life, spreading silently but with undeniable impact, and as the city hummed around us, indifferent yet illuminating, I felt a small, quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. Revenge, I realized, didn't need to shout, it only needed to exist, and eventually, the world would take notice. The dining room smelled faintly of tea and the lingering chill of rain outside. I sat across from him, my hands folded neatly on the table, each finger deliberately still, each breath measured. The soft patter of rain against the window created a rhythm that seemed to underscore the tension between us. Neither condemning nor forgiving, just observing. He avoided my gaze at first, then caught it briefly, and I saw it there. The flicker of guilt he could no longer hide. No raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just two people, separated by a lifetime of lies, seated in a room that had once held warmth but now carried quiet accusation. I sipped my tea slowly, deliberately, letting the heat rise through my fingers and into my chest, reminding me that control was mine. The teacup trembled slightly as I set it down, a small, almost invisible signal of the tension that hung between us. He finally spoke, his voice low, hesitant. "I didn't think you'd know." It wasn't a confession, not entirely. But it was enough. Enough to reveal the cracks in the armor he had built with so much care. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, letting each second emphasize the weight of his words, the enormity of what he had done. The rain outside continued, steady, unjudging, indifferent to our private reckoning. I leaned back slightly, maintaining calm, my eyes unwavering. Dignity, I realized, was a sharper weapon than any accusation. It forced him to confront his reflection in a way that anger never could. The quiet between us was louder than any scream, heavier than any tear, and it pressed upon him with a slow, unrelenting force. In that stillness, I understood, revenge did not need spectacle. Truth did not require dramatics. Sometimes the calmest presence, seated with patience and poise, could unravel a lifetime of deception more completely than words or violence ever could. And as the rain whispered against the window, I felt the last threads of control slip from him, leaving only the undeniable reality of what had been betrayed. The living room was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of a single candle. Its light flickered across the walls, casting shadows that danced slowly, like memories finally letting go. I sank into the armchair, feeling the warmth seep into my shoulders, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed my chest to unclench. The storm that had lived inside me, the rage, the betrayal, the meticulous planning had begun to settle. Outside, the night air was calm, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant rain. It seeped in through the slightly open window, brushing against my skin and reminding me that life continued, indifferent to past hurts. I smiled softly, not out of joy, not yet, but from a quiet recognition. I no longer needed to hold on to his guilt. I had faced it, confronted it, and now, The act of letting it go was mine alone. Forgiveness came slowly, like a tide retreating. It was not about excusing what he had done, nor pretending the pain had never existed. It was about reclaiming myself. My nights, my mornings, my moments between breaths. I traced my fingers over the candlelight, watching shadows flicker and merge, and felt a strange peace settle into my bones. There was power in this release, silent, unspoken, and entirely mine. I remembered the small victories, the quiet exposures, the confrontations held without shouting. Each had been a step, a preparation, but this act of forgiving, of releasing the weight from my chest, was the culmination. The storm had broken, but it had left me standing, grounded and unshaken. And in that quiet room, with the candle flickering and the night air breathing gently through the window, I realized revenge had taught me patience, courage, and awareness. But forgiveness, true, deliberate, unhurried forgiveness, was the final liberation. I closed my eyes, letting the calm envelop me. Knowing I was finally free, I sat on the balcony, the first light of dawn stretching across the city like a slow, deliberate brushstroke. The buildings, the streets, the quiet hum of early traffic, all seemed untouched by the storms of the past weeks. I held a warm cup of tea in my hands, its heat grounding me, a quiet companion to my thoughts. The steam curled upward, dissolving into the morning air, carrying with it the residue of sleepless nights, whispered plans, and the sharp edges of betrayal. My scars were invisible, but I felt them in the hollow beneath my collarbone, in the faint ache behind my ribs. They were reminders, not of weakness, but of endurance. Each moment of pain, each sting of words and betrayals, had been etched into me, shaping my resolve, sharpening my understanding of trust and deception. The lessons were clear now. Vigilance must coexist with love, courage with patience, and dignity with anger carefully contained. The city awakened slowly, unhurried, indifferent to the private histories unfolding on its rooftops and in its apartments. I watched people begin their routines, unaware of the personal battles waged behind closed doors. And I understood then that life itself moved forward in quiet certainty. Pain comes, betrayal strikes, revenge may temper the heart, but in the end, the strength that endures is always quiet, dignified, self-earned. I took a slow sip of tea and let the warmth spread, feeling a subtle smile form. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need applause. The knowledge of my own endurance, the calm assertion of self-respect, was enough. I had faced deception, navigated the labyrinth of anger and vengeance, and emerged intact. The lessons remained, etched quietly, like soft shadows at the edges of light, guiding me without fanfare. And as the sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the streets, I felt the truth of it. Life goes on, pain teaches, and dignity, silent, steady, unyielding, endures. Life teaches us hard lessons, and sometimes we survive stronger than we imagined. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow more stories like this, and share your own moments of strength in the comments. I'd love to hear them.